You know, he's really he's shameless in intellectual argument. He's absolutely without character, a moral foundation, or even intellectual substance.
What are you really glad about?
Oh, I'm really glad that you recommended reading these stories because I have wanted to get into short story writing because Kelby and I write very short, basically novelettes. One of our books would probably be about the size of 9 lives,
Hmm.
right? So switching over to short stories just makes sense. And I mean, I had obviously read Omelas probably 7 or 8 times. Well, actually more than that because I taught it.
Is that
So
how
that's
you pronounce
six.
it? Omelas.
Omelas.
Yeah, okay.
Hmm.
Okay. I
Um,
say omelas. I like your pronunciation though because it sounds a bit Yiddish.
yeah.
It sounds kind of like bubala, like omelas.
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 Omelas. Oh, my
What are you
omelas.
doing? I'm schwitzing right now.
Does he have to be in a hole? But but uh but
Yes.
yes, he does. Th- She is so good.
Hmm.
So good. And some of the lines, you'll be reading about space miners, the kind that mine, not the young ones. And then she'll drop a line that is just like, I teared up in
Hmm.
9 lives,
Hmm.
9 lives in particular, a few times, which is like how beautiful her observations were. And so, yeah, I was happy you invited me on, and I was happy to read these stories today.
Well, yeah, so this is an impromptu thing due to a rescheduling of another guest. But yeah, I actually came up with this idea for Ursula Le Guin for you, and I had like a vague idea that maybe we'd do a book or something. But because I remember you mentioned her, and I can't remember where. I think it might have been in one of the Gene Wolfe episodes we did. By the way, this is J David Osborne. He's been on the show like 4 times, so you all know his voice. So welcome, David.
Hello. Hey, hello.
Um,
Hello.
but uh, yeah, had you? What's your experience with her anyway? Because I know that you mentioned her before, but maybe it's more the novels you're familiar with than the short stories.
I have a really roundabout way of getting to her because I think most people read Omelas and they probably read Earthsea first. Um, I read Always Coming Home first. You ever read that one?
I haven't read that one. What's it about?
It's it's basically this you know how Tolkien did the Silmarillion
Hmm.
about Middle-earth? Always Coming Home is a document sort of like that about a sort of far future Stone Age civilization and all of its um, lore and stories and history, which it's a little dry, but it's also really fascinating. So I found it because I am a part of a magic occult community called Rune Soup. And the guy who runs it, Gordon White, is a
Lives in
huge
Tasmania.
Ursula Le Guin. He
Mm,
does, in
mm,
fact, yep.
mm.
He's a big Ursula guy, and he just hammers that home over and over, like Ursula, Ursula, Ursula. Like this is the thing. This is it. So Always Coming Home was what he recommended to me, and then I read The Dispossessed. I read the first Earthsea book, which I thought was really good. I thought it was really interesting. Um, and then it was sort of one after the other, and I had the Unreal and the Real on hand, though I hadn't read these stories before. So Ursula is a work in progress for me. Trying to think if I've left anything out. Um,
Well, you
no, I think
lived
that's
in
it.
you lived in Portland for a while, didn't you?
Yes.
and so did she. Like
Yeah.
I think in her later years, didn't she died in Portland, I think. So
hmm hmm
little
hmm
connection there maybe. How long did you live in Portland for, by the way? I don't think I've ever asked you this.
I lived in Portland for 3 years. I
Mm.
moved there 10 years ago now. Yeah,
Yeah.
it was 10 years ago that I moved there. And I moved there very specifically to be around the Bizarro writing community. Uh, they would hold a convention every year at the McMenamins Edgefield. So McMenamins in Portland is this company that buys up old buildings, so old schoolhouses, um, plantations, et cetera, et cetera. And they set up sort of B&B bars in these establishments. So McMenamins Edgefield is in Troutdale, Oregon, and it was a former plantation that was turned into an old folks home, and they do a really good job of decorating these places. So
Mm.
every room that you stay in at Edgefield has a mural on the wall of the old person who lived there and kind of their life story written out. And it's very um overlook, right? It's
Hmm.
creepy. It's got a lot of strange art. You'll be walking down a hallway and there was this great painting that I would always pass of a rabbit sitting at a table with like a poker hand in front of it, and the rabbit is just sort of looking at you. But it's fantastic. You wander this hotel, and there are little nooks of, like a tiny bar with a bartender with like four chairs that you and a
Oh.
buddy can sit in. It's so cool. And they brew their own beer.
Hmm.
Um, but most of my friends at the time lived there in Portland. And my most important lesson from moving there is to not move to a place because a bunch of other artists live there, because they will never contact you and you will just end up paying out the ass for rent, and you'll be living essentially the same life you always live, just more expensively.
Hmm.
So, but it's a beautiful place, lots of great food. Um, Extremely glad that I got out before COVID.
Yeah, because
Extremely glad.
that would have been an experience for sure. But yeah, so is it as bad? Was it as bad when you were there as people kind of expect, or maybe that it is now? Probably not. Probably
In terms of
in terms of
retardation?
like, yeah,
Oh
blue
yeah,
hairs and
yeah,
shit like that.
yeah. It's that bad. It's those rumors
Because
are totally true.
because sometimes I see like videos online, and you just like you see videos online about like a place that you live in, like and it's not actually that bad. Like I live in the city
hmm
that's the biggest libtard city in Australia, but it's not actually that bad. But like then you look at things like Portland, and I'm like, I've never seen anything like that here.
No,
Like
no, it's different.
furries in diapers, like protesting
Yep.
Palestine or something like that. Like, you,
hmm
you know.
hmm No, what's really bad about Portland is the homeless. So the homeless
Hmm.
encampments are out of control. For a while there, I worked as a concierge in a place called Fountain Plaza, which is downtown Portland. And I worked the overnight, and it was a great job because I mostly read and wrote and occasionally glanced at the security cameras. Um, but if I walked out to smoke a cigarette, you would hear the insane Joker-esque hootings of the homeless nearby. Just like the kind of stuff that if you put in a movie, you would think that's overdoing it just a little bit. But and I I feel like Portland, yeah, was probably the beginning of, I don't know if I ever necessarily got red pilled per se, but it was certainly the beginning of those kind of thoughts starting to creep in, because
Mm.
I had grown up in Oklahoma, which is completely red. And as a kid, you push against whatever the kind of dominant thing is where you live. So I had pretty bog standard lib opinions about shit. And then I saw how libs live for 3 years in Portland. And I thought, oh, holy shit, these people are insane. This is not a fun. And I think the thing is that it's just, you realize what a unfun, grouchy, mean-spirited way it is to live. You
Mm.
know, it's essentially people who are constantly judging other people and themselves and speaking on that judgment. And they just end up being real buzzkills.
Mm. You know who wasn't like judgmental was Ursula K Le Guin.
No, she was
Like
not.
she had such a in these stories, like, but also in her work more generally, she has this something that I think that she inherited from her father, which is this sort of view of people's lifestyles that's very kind of non-judgmental. Like she's like her father, she's a cultural relativist, and like a lot of people get a bit awkward around that term because like especially people who have a sense of justice or whatever. Cultural relativism is often invoked as this way to justify like unjustifiable like cultural practices like female genital mutilation or something like that. But the thing about her father was Arthur Kroeber, who was a pretty famous Californian ethnologist, I think he was, or anthropologist, sorry, is probably the more correct term. And I'm mentioning this because I think he was extremely influential on her just generally, and like especially her work. But he he was one of the kind of champions of this anthropological idea of cultural relativism, which is that, one culture is not better than the other sort of thing, but this is it's a way of looking at different cultures rather than judging them, if that makes sense. So I think a lot of people slide when they like accuse someone of being a relativist in terms of cultures. They slide from a description to like a moral sort of thing. Like someone like Alfred Kroeber or his daughter Ursula K Le Guin is looking at cultures and how they operate, and not necessarily saying that this is good or this is bad. It's just like, it just is, It's very Taoist of her, which we can get into too, but
100%. I have her touted Jing. This is one of the hardest things for people who I know. So I will say Westerners, Americans, Europeans, Australians, to wrap your head around. And it is the idea that you don't have to have an opinion about things. So we are so caught up in the binary of good and bad that saying that you don't think it's either forces the person you're talking to try to put that into the binary. It's like, wait, is that good or bad? But when you get to that point, which I feel like I am sometimes, although not as much as I'd like to be, you really just genuinely don't give a shit about whether it's right or wrong. It just is. It is what it is. You talked about female genital mutilation. That it just is, right? I don't like it, I guess. But whether or not I like it is the least interesting thing I could spend my time thinking about. And I think that about art too. I think I said that recently, maybe on an episode of Agitator, but when you're talking to somebody about a movie and they say, "Oh, well, I really like that," or "No, I didn't like that." It's the least interesting thing. Like, who cares? I don't care if you like it or don't like it.
Yeah.
What about it? What about it? Talk about it, whether that it's good or bad. But yeah, really fucking throws people for a loop, man, to say that, because you know what they do? They immediately say that you're affecting a pose. They say, "Oh, well, aren't you cool?
Yeah.
You just don't care."
Yeah, you need to take a stand on this movie
On
that really
I
does
don't.
it really doesn't have anything to do with you, like, but unless you want it to. And the way it has anything to do with you is based on not necessarily what you like about it, but like something that you're responding to, which doesn't mean that you need to slot it into these like ideas of, oh, that was good, or I appreciated this, or like it can just be, this thing made me feel a certain way. And that doesn't need to be in a binary of good or bad. Like, a few episodes ago, I read, what's it called? 20 Days of Turin. And it happened to be a great book, but the way it made me feel was physically ill. Like,
Yes, I say
and
this all the time about Turin and about Blake Butler's 300 Million.
mhm.
When I'm like, oh, it's one of my top 10 books, and people say, oh, you really liked it. I say, no, 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 no.
No.
Liking? No, I didn't like it at all. I felt like I wanted to vomit the entire
Mm.
time I was reading it.
Yeah, but that so this kind of position that Le Guin takes on not necessarily like it's a position she takes in the invented cultures that the cultures that she makes up, but in her stories in general is very much like that, where like it's not necessarily, she's not judging these cultures, she's like depicting it, and she might be in some ways kind of refracting that out to judgments on society at the time she wrote them. Although I think that's kind of arguable, because I think a lot of people want her to be that, but I don't think I don't think she is. But
Mhm.
so, which we can talk about when we talk about Sword, because like that is a very interesting piece, like because it's sort of championed as this like feminist thing. But anyway, we'll talk about that when we come to it. But she just has this way of just sitting with the cultural practice or the characters that's very it's not that she refuses to take a stand on it, it's just that here it is, and and she unfolds it from there, rather than, it's not moral instruction. That's the thing that's kind of interesting about it, I think. Other than, I guess, the only moral principle would be that sort of like sitting back and embracing things as they are, maybe.
Right, because she was a pacifist
Mm-hmm.
anarchist,
Mm-hmm.
which if you hear most people on the internet say that now, you are about to meet the
They all live in
dumbest person
Portland.
you've. They all live in Portland. But if one person truly embodied that, it was Ursula.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that it is, you cannot be a pacifist anarchist and not adopt this observational stance
Mm-hmm.
on other people and the stories that you tell. There's something just so, when I read her writing, it just feels so peaceful. And it, like, all of her writing, even in Soar, feels like a warm fire.
Mm.
Oh, I'm getting told a tale. But like, if you're somebody who genuinely believes that human beings should be left up by and large to their own devices, and also that they shouldn't kill each other, you can't show up to have a moral opinion about everything. Those two, it doesn't go together. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that's why when you see these people online who also claim to be pacifist anarchists, but then they also say things like, well, and then, Nazis should be shot.
Mm.
Grandmother Ursula would never, she would never say something like that, because you
Mm.
can't, it doesn't fit.
Mm.
How is that pacifism and how is that anarchism?
Mm-hmm.
It's neither
Mm-hmm.
of those things.
Yeah, and I don't know. So speaking of poses, I kind of find her anarchism a little bit posy, but we don't need to go into that. But
No, I'm interested. What do you think about it?
just like, I think for her, it's sort of like um, it's a thought experiment, and I think it's a thought experiment for all anarchists, because essentially that's what it is. Because it's an impossibility. Like, anarchy is impossible. Like, it can't happen. Like, and also the practical realities of just observing, like, and I've done this. I've sat back and I've observed, much like grandmother Ursula has. And anarchists, man, they love rules. So many rules. Like, just lists and lists of rules
Dude,
about what you
my
can and
my
can't be or say
holy
and do.
shit. My first encounter, how I was talking earlier about how Portland red pilled me.
Mm-hmm.
My first encounter with this type of person was before that, when I went on a tour with my friend Eric across the country, where we did this performance art live reading show thing, and it was in a bunch of, punk squats, etc. But we went to one in Salt Lake City, and it was an anarchist squat where they were having an anarchist talk that night, and we were kind of the opening act. It was a lot of fun. My buddy ate raw eggs, and I sat on his shoulders while I read. It was good stuff. But you walk up to this house, and on the door, from the top of the door to the bottom, there are rules about what you do and don't do. And he and I were setting up, and we had bought these coffee beers that kind of looked like Starbucks cans.
Mm-hmm.
And we were drinking them the whole time because we didn't read the fucking rules that were on the door. And somebody noticed that we were drinking beer in the squat, and that was a no-go. There was
You weren't allowed
no
to drink
alcohol.
beer.
No, there was no alcohol allowed. And they said, you need to go out. And we had to, we couldn't even drink it on the lawn. We had to be, on the street while we drank our beers. So whenever we wanted to, we had to go out. And I was like, man, this kind of sucks. Those guys who love George W. Bush at least let me drink beer.
Yeah, it seems a bit hierarchical.
Yeah, you think? Yeah, exactly. But it was all women, and it was told to us in that mothering tone. If you want to, you can, but you may not do that here. You must do it out. And I remember we were just me and my buddy were drinking the coffee beers by the truck, and we were like, this kind of sucks, man. These people suck.
Yeah. I think any artist who takes, who is sympathetic to anarchism or whatever, kind of is playing with the idea. And she does. She plays with the idea in, which novel is it? Is it Left-Handed Darkness or Dispossessed? I can't remember which one does the anarchism. I think is it Dispossessed?
Dispossessed for sure, yeah, because Left-Handed Darkness is more gendery.
The gender, yeah. I always confuse the titles of
they're
those.
both the Hainish cycle novels.
Yeah. So it is an interesting thought experiment. What if there were no classes? What if there were no hierarchies? And even that as well, I think in the Dispossessed is that you don't really see that society. You get references to it in the book. It's never something that's fully lived in, because I think that's a sort of tacit admission that it can't ever come to be. It's a utopian vision, and that's fine. If you want to kind of entertain that, but people can perhaps have it as a guiding principle in their lives or whatever.
That's what I was going to say. Yeah. What do you think about that anarchism as a sort of inner moral?
Yeah, because right? But then I'm just you should just be Christian, because that's just, or religious of some kind, because I don't know, it seems more fruitful to have this sort of vision far off that you are kind of working towards. But that's neither here or there. What I'm sort of saying is that I think for her it was a very I would say a pose, but it was something she was interested in, and really was a engine of a lot of her creative work. Rather than, I don't think she was, not to my knowledge anyway, an anarchist activist of any sort. I think.
No. I couldn't see Le Guin being an activist of any kind.
No,
she seemed to just be, so anarchism and libertarianism are so close to each other, in that the people who follow them get really embarrassing when they try to turn it into a coherent ideology. But it makes so much more sense when you realize that they're just people who want to be left alone in the woods. Once you get that, you're like, oh, cool, bet. Yeah, I'm with that.
Yeah, me too.
Live in the woods. I'd do it. My dad does it. He seems really happy.
Yeah.
So
chop lots of wood, chop his own wood.
He does chop his own wood, and he has cows and horses and sheep, and he sends me pictures of his dogs and makes chilies. And yeah, I mean,
cool. What kind of part of the country does he live?
Oklahoma. He's here.
Oh, yeah, cool.
Yeah. But a lot of veterans do that too. I think Dad's dealing with a lot of PTSD that he refuses to go to therapy for. Chad. And so he just lives out in the woods and doesn't associate with people.
Yeah.
And sends really bad Facebook memes to me all the time. But God love him.
That's the side note. That's something that I think people don't understand, is that men don't need therapy. They just need to do things. Like, that is the best therapy for men. But anyway, we won't get into that. So I think she had this background of a father who was very into anthropology. And I think she studied languages too. So already there, she had this sort of awareness of, she wasn't monocultural. She was very understood, other cultures. And that is really kind of comes through in her work. I might save it until we talk about one of the later, kind of stories, but I'll just signpost it here that her father, one of the reasons that I think he's very influential on her is that he's, have you heard the story of Ishi? Okay. This is really interesting. So, Ursula's father, Alfred Kroeber, sorry. He was one of the, anthropologists who kind of studied this last member of a Californian, Indian tribe, who just randomly appeared out of nowhere in I think it was 1911 or something like that, very early in the 20th century. And they were forever trying to work out where he was from, what tribe and whatever. They eventually sort of found out that he was part of a offshoot tribe of, I can't remember which people it was. I think it was I can't remember. It started with Y. Yahi was the people that he was a part of, but he was the last person left. And he was kind of like an uncontacted member of the tribe. So, but everyone else in his tribe had died, and he just sort of wandered into this Californian town. And so obviously the anthropologist was super interested in him, and, it was the early 20th century. So it was very, as you can imagine, lots of skull measuring and stuff like that. But actually her father was very, because like I said before, he was a very, he was a cultural relativist, didn't have this kind of superior attitude to it, wanted to know where he was from. The guy ended up being known as Ishi because he couldn't reveal his actual name, because part of a custom in his tribe is that he has to be introduced to other people from his tribe, and there were no tribe members left. And so really fascinating story that Ursula's mother actually wrote the book on this after he died. I think it was called Ishi and Two Worlds. And so this guy basically lived in San Francisco, lived in a museum for a while as a sort of live exhibit. And then and then
that's crazy,
in the sense of he would, people would come and they'd watch him do the different crafts and make the arrowheads and all that sort of shit. And yeah, one of the things that I think was interesting about it was that this idea of names, that his real name could not be revealed because there was a sort of power in it, and that comes up in Earthsea, right? That you need to know the true name of something, and if you do, you'll have power over it. But Ishi basically lived for I think he was in his 50s when they found him, and I think he lived eventually succumbed to TB. I think it was tuberculosis. And her father was trying to make make that they didn't do really heinous autopsies on him, because it's we've got heaps of Indian skeletons, we don't need another one, but eventually what ended up happening was while he wasn't looking, they took his brain out and kind of preserved it, and then somehow he was involved with, even though he was resistant to this, he was somehow involved with giving it to the Smithsonian. So he's sort of like a figure, a controversial figure in this story, even though he had a lot of empathy for this guy and was like truly his friend. But I think I listened to a podcast about this, which was really interesting. And they kind of overplay their hand a bit by saying, oh, this basically influenced all her work. And I'm like, come on. But I think it did influence a lot of her work. Like the idea of like, one culture meeting another, a more advanced culture meeting another, and like treating that culture as sort of lesser or whatever. And that is probably why she came to adopt this attitude of cultures that we were talking about before. This comes into play, I think, in the first story, which we're going to do these chronologically. So the first story that we're going to look at is called Semley's Necklace. So this one was originally published in the 60s, I believe. It was 64, yeah, and it was called The Dowry of what's the word? I've got to look up my
Aglia.
Yeah. So then it was changed to, when it was subsequently collected, it was changed to Semley's Necklace, and that was included as a prologue in Ursula's first published book, which was called Buchanan's World. Okay, so this follows basically a woman in a sort of feudal structured society who's searching for her ancestral necklace, which is this beautiful necklace that she needs to sort of prove herself in this, like, the hierarchy of this world. She's flying around on a flying steed, which is really cool, and it has this sort of sense of a fantasy world. So like there's creatures and like elf-like kind of races and dwarves, but then at the end of the story you sort of see that the dwarfish sort of race that she encounters is actually more advanced than all of the others, and they're kind of considered troglodytes. And then they kind of transport her to, I think it's another planet, and to this museum where her necklace is. She gets it, but then due to traveling at light speed through a spaceship, she returns back, and time has dilated. So her daughter is way older and her husband has died. It's actually a really kind of tragic story, but it does flow into some of that stuff that I was talking about with her, like, this is the way the culture is. And then we get these glimpses of this more advanced culture as well in the museum. And that's another touchstone, I think, that people are because of this association with her father and this, last of his tribe Indian guy, they often make as well. Like the relationship to this advanced museum, like curators to these more kind of, quote unquote primitive peoples. So yeah, that's another, like, I'm not going to do this through every story, but like, I think that they are sort of onto something with like those associations with her father in some of her fiction.
I could definitely see that. This, by the way, is, of the stories that we're talking about today, the most Gene Wolfian.
Yes.
It felt very Book of the New Sun. It felt like it would slot right in as a story that Severian overhears at a pub or something. I thought that the framing device of it was really interesting, especially how it turns out to not be a framing device and actually part of the story, as you mentioned, because she goes to the museum. But this story in particular, I thought, was very interesting for its meandering fable-like quality, because Semley is a kind of gender reversed, she's gender reversed in the sense that you would normally think it was the guy who would want to, buy cool things for his girl. And Semley is somebody who has married this king, and on this planet, basically, everybody's broke because every year space aliens come down and demand tribute from these people. And so nobody has anything. And she feels kind of bad that she married this guy who has a castle and she didn't have anything to bring to it. So she becomes obsessed with finding this necklace. And her sister-in-law is like, girl, chill. Nobody has anything. It's fine. Like, he likes you, okay? it's good enough. And she says, no, I must go get my sapphire necklace from wherever it is. And so she sets off on her journey that eventually causes her to miss her entire child's life, basically, which turns out to be very tragic. She flies around on, I got the impression it was a giant winged cat.
Yeah,
because it was purring a lot.
It's purring, yeah. Like, yeah, sorry, go.
But to your point about this influence of, the more advanced civilizations, I think that is for sure the major theme of this in two ways. One, there is Rokanen, who is sort of reading this story off of some kind of magic tablet or whatever because they're reading about different civilizations and they're kind of going, oh, interesting. Like they have interiority and lives. Isn't that crazy? Yeah, glad we can find that out about them. But then also this big bad Star-Lord force, right? That keeps just extracting resources. And I think it's such an effective way through fiction of showing what it must be like to be a colonized people who you have no idea what these people are about. They're fighting some kind of war that's couched in these apocalyptic terms, like when the Star Lords come back to end time and shit like that. But all they realize materially, practically, is that these fuckers come by and just take their shit and then leave, And it's as simple as that. And it leads her on this quest to do whatever she can to try to get some material form of agency back, which is really what the necklace is. It's about kind of in the face of a colonizing force having some kind of nice, pretty thing to show that it's basically like the necklace is her version of people who get cool rims in the hood, right? Like they're not saving their money. It's not practical. It doesn't make any sense, but they're going to be flashy because it's all they have. It's all they have to like kind of exteriorize their pride. And I just really liked her visiting the first guy she visits is just drunk. It's her dad. She visits her dad first.
Yeah.
And her dad's just pissed drunk and he's like, go away. You're killing my buzz. I don't know where the fucking necklace is. Like, just leave me alone. And when she finally gets to the people who live where sunlight has never touched, right? It really reminded me of who wrote that story, The White People? Was it Arthur Machen? I can't remember. There's this great story called The White People. I remember the story, but not the author, apparently. And it's a fairy story. And it's about a girl who gets not tricked, but kind of gently persuaded into the world of the Fae. And it goes on for maybe 80 pages, and it's just her experience in this world of the Fae. And that's what these underground dwarf people reminded me of. They're tricksters. They're getting something out of her, and they are putting her steed into a box and injecting it with something, and then they're injecting her with something, and then all of a sudden she's in this kind of spaceship thing and hurtling through space, and then she gets her necklace and comes back, but at what cost? And that to me seems to be a key for most fairy stories, is that you come back with something, but what you've given up might not have been worth it.
Oh yeah, and the relation to time too. Like there's so many fairy stories where like, a day in fairyland is like 20 years or something in the real world. Like that's such a big thing. And it's particularly Irish stories, like the stories of O'Shane and stuff like that, where like, he's allowed to, there's some story where he's allowed to he's taken to the fairy world. He's allowed to go back to the real world, but he can't get off his horse. If he does get off his horse, he'll be like subject to all of the years he's been gone. And like he touches the ground, I think accidentally, and then just turns into an old man. Like there's like cool shit like that,
Fairy stories are basic because people who have OCD, they're basically constantly living in a fairy story. Like if you have OCD, you're like, if I don't touch that, it's like a little troll guy tells you, if you don't touch that light 3 times, and while you're doing it, you're not thinking about cherry tomatoes, your dick will fall off and you will be gay. And then you do it 3 times, but you don't think about cherry tomatoes, and then here we are. So
Yeah, the one thing that's really cool about this is that sequence that you mentioned as well, where Semley is taken, she sort of negotiates with these troglodytes that to be taken to the place where the necklace is, which is this museum in this like far off planet. That is described in such a great way. Like it's described from her reference points. Like obviously we can see from the description that it's a spaceship of some sort, but like the way that it's described is like in these sort of medieval terms. Like it's just how like a medieval person would and has described being taken away by a spaceship. So we don't need to get into the ancient alien stuff, but you know, I know you're on board with that. So
yes, 100%. It's all real.
It's all real.
But yeah, no, I loved this story so much, and I think from a writing perspective, it hammered home a lesson that Uncle Gene taught me through the Book of the New Sun, which is there's no problem with rambling if what you're rambling about is interesting. You can take whatever detour you want and go, because there's something extremely hypnotic. A lot of South American writers do this too, like Gabriel Garcia Marquez. Their whole writing style is to just start to digress, but then the digression just keeps going and expanding and expand. And you keep waiting for what the punchline is, and it always seems like it's mildly unsatisfying what the conclusion of the digression was, but you had so much fun getting there, you don't really care. I feel that way about Semley's necklace too. There's no big, I don't really feel like it's a twist, you know? I mean, it's a parable basically, but I also wasn't mad that the end is just that it's 20 years later and she's missed a lot of stuff, because you're just going with it as it goes.
Yeah. It actually weirdly to me, it was a kind of inverted, well, not inverted, but like maybe like a sort of warped form of like a catabasis story. Do you know what that is? It's like a descent into the underworld sort of story. It's a common,
of course.
It's a common myth theme. Like, so where, you know, it's not quite the underworld, but it's like these people that she goes to live in caves. But the interesting thing about that is that like she's not brought down like into death, although she does say that she feels like she dies when she gets on the ship and they travel, and it's something to do with whatever. I don't know if it's FTL. It's not FTL because there's time dilation, but like so whatever the system of transport is, which is left vague, which was a good idea, by the way. But like Semley kind of reflects that she feels like she's died, and this idea of like descending into the underworld, conquering death, and then coming back with some sort of boon. It's sort of like structurally very similar to that, but is it like a warped version of that? Because it's like that's not actually that good. Because like normally in the mytheme, it's like someone will descend into the afterworld and come back, and they've conquered death. They are usually rewarded with some kind of, you know, immortality, or they join the gods or whatever. But this is just like, she basically is like, fuck, my husband is dead and I've missed my daughter's life, and then she runs off into the forest. Like it's warping that catabasis myth, which I think is really interesting.
It's also interesting that she runs off into the woods. I wonder if the point of all that isn't that that's what these people who go on these catabasis adventures are really doing in the first place.
Mm.
That the immortality is irrelevant, and it can be something as simple as a trinket. The point being that what you really want to do is just not be in a castle as a mom and a wife. You want to go on adventures and
Mm.
have fun.
Mm.
That's the point.
Yeah.
You can be changed or not. Because does Semley seem that upset at the end? I can't remember now, but it doesn't seem like she's that broken up about it.
I think she's upset about her husband dying, but
Yeah.
you know,
Not
as
so
you
much
would.
the daughter. The daughter, she's just like,
All
oh,
right.
oh, well.
I don't have to explain periods to her. Like it's good.
She's like, thanks. I just want to call the woman Dorcas. Uh, whatever her sister-in-law's name is.
Dorcas is such a funny name. Like
Yeah.
I always
Yeah.
imagine like throughout that entire book, like Book of the New Sun, for some reason, I just always imagine a woman named Dorcas with really high hair, like a
Yeah.
wall of hair, like Elaine
Imagine
from
falling in,
Seinfeld.
yeah,
Like,
yeah. Imagine falling in love with a bitch named Dorcas. Couldn't be me.
yeah, so yeah, I really like this story, and like just the stuff she's working with there is really kind of, I think it's kind of heady, like, and she
Mhm.
develops this the sense of adventure too. I think this is what a lot of people respond to with Le Guin. Like obviously there's all this like really interesting anthropological, philosophical stuff in all of her work, but the great thing about all of her work is in that in most of it, it's a real like it's not boring. She loves adventure and the spirit of
Mhm.
adventure, and like, you know, goes into all of that, and like it's always a fun ride, her stories, definitely.
Absolutely. Yeah. No,
Mm,
I really like this one too.
yeah.
Yeah.
Um so the next one chronologically is Nine Lives, and so I feel like you have a lot to say about
Ooh.
this one.
Dude, let me bust out my phone. I got notes for this one.
Oh, you got notes.
Well, I should say I got quotes is
Oh
what I
yeah,
got.
there are so many good quotes in this, but one of the things that I love about this story more than the story itself. So this was published in 1969, and do you know where it was first published?
Where?
Playboy.
Let's go. Man, what a fucking time to be alive,
Yes,
dude.
so
That would have
good.
been
She would have
so
been
crazy
paid
to pick
so
up a
much for it.
Playboy.
Yeah,
To pick up a Playboy, and this is the story that's in it.
yeah,
You're
yeah.
just chilling looking at boobs, and this is the story you get to read. God, what a fucking time to be alive, bro. We
Yeah.
got gypped.
And I love that, you know, Ursula Guin, you know, perhaps the OG girl boss is like, yeah, I'll publish in Playboy. Why not? You
Yeah,
know?
sounds good.
Yeah.
Sounds good. I'm sure the pay was, I'm sure she got like $3,000 in
I rem
1969 for this.
Yeah, I remember like who was someone I knew, I can't remember who it was. They were Australian, like a writer. And this was the tail end of Playboy publishing stories. And they said they got paid, I think it was like $5 a word or something like that.
God damn.
And I'm like,
That
this
is
this would have
insane.
this would have been in like probably the early 2000s. So it would
Man.
have been way more. Well, with inflation, it probably would have been similar, but it would have been
Yeah.
way more. Like,
So crazy.
when she published it.
Hmm.
So yeah, this is a sort of novelette, and it's a science fiction story again. This is set on another planet where there's these two miners, and they are joined by this group of 10 clones. And the way she deals with clones in this is really interesting because, you know, people are cloned from an original, and then they sort of almost have like a hive mind. It kind of reminded me of what's that show called the Wachowskis made? Sense8, where like they had this like cluster of minds. Even though they weren't really clones in that show, it's sort of like a similar principle in that these clones work together, and they work together really well because they're essentially all of the same people. And so what happens in this story is that, yeah, they arrive on the planet, they're working really well. The two normal guys are kind of like freaked out by how well they work together. And then what happens is that there's an accident, and basically all but one of the clones dies very horribly. And this was probably the most disturbing story of the one that we're doing today, and the thing that like fucked me up the most was how every one of the clones that had died, this character by the name of, what's his name? Kaf, is it? Yeah.
Gaff, yeah.
Yeah. And they're all named after Hebrew letters. So there's Aleph, Beth, Gimel, whatever the Hebrew letters are. So he survives, but at great cost, because he's sort of like living this half-life where he's experiencing all of their deaths. It's really fucking disturbing. Like, one suffocates, one is crushed. Like it's really kind of gross in those bits. But yeah, so, and there's a lot of like philosophical kind of reflections on how what it is to be self versus other, and he almost has to be taught how to interact with people that aren't him in the clone sense. And he's sort of I think one of the things I really dug about this was how it kind of took the what am I trying to say? It took this idea of cloning and then like did something different with it, rather than just, oh, this person is exactly like me. What does that mean for me? It's sort of like didn't make it about the individual, it made it about the others, because it's like, what does it mean to encounter the other, right? Even if that other is yourself. And what does it mean to lose the other as well? I thought there were really kind of interesting things that she was saying in there. Like this one, I think is probably the one I enjoyed the most. And it's because it's the one that's most sort of kind of hard to describe in a way, like its effect. So you had notes, you liked this one?
I like this one a lot. It was also definitely my favorite out of the four. And first of all, a small thing, but a really cool trick that Le Guin pulls is that she never refers to them as the clones. It's always the clone, singular. And it's never remarked upon. But they're not 10 clones. They're 10 clone. There's a great line towards the beginning of the story where she says that the clone, who I think Pew is talking to, never learned sympathy, because sympathy is something you give because you're expecting someone to give it back to you. And the clone never had to do that. So it doesn't know what sympathy is at all, because other people have always been an extension of its own John Crow brain. And this is the subtle devastation that Ursula can drop if she wants to. The line that sympathy is something people give because they want it back. It's like, ooh. And it's so not done in a snarky tone, or even, it doesn't feel like it's even meant to make you feel bad, but it really does. Because you're suddenly like, oh man, is that true? Is that why I feel sympathetic towards people? Because I want people to be sympathetic towards me.
But it's interesting what the word want is doing there, though. Like, I feel like it's more of a impulsive thing. Like, do we do it because we want it back? Or do we do it because it's just something that you do and you get it back? If that makes sense. You know what I mean? Like,
whatever makes me seem like a better person is the one that I'm going with. But no, this is by far the most disturbing story, like you said, too, because the clones in general are creepy. They fuck each other.
hmm
They
And yeah,
which
when Pew and what's the other guy's name? I forget his name. Martin had that conversation where they're like, is it masturbation or is it
yeah,
incest?
yeah. Is it incest or
Little from column
masturbation?
A, little from column B, you know?
And by the way, Pew and Martin are some of Le Guin, as far as what I've read, they are some of her most human,
Oh, they're
interesting
hilarious.
characters. And because they're so fucking funny.
Mm.
And like how they're kind of married
Yeah.
because they've been together for so long.
Yeah.
And it's really sweet when Martin is in danger and Pew goes out to rescue him, and Calf is like, "Do you love him?" And he goes, "Well, I mean, it's hard to explain." And he kind of hems
It's
and
kind of
haws, and
like
he's like,
that.
but then he's finally like, "Yeah, I love him. All right,
Yeah,
fine.
yeah,
Like,
yeah.
I love him." I was like, "Oh man, that hits." Um, but yeah, when the other clones die and Cap is like having to psychically experience all of their deaths and it's killing him, and then he's being resuscitated and he has to, that was really rough. And then there's a great bit where Martin is talking about like he doesn't have any manners at all. Like we have to teach him manners because there has to be some, this is like going towards what we were talking about with Le Guin and her pacifist anarchism. But it's interesting that this character of Martin is talking about how there have to be standards and there has to be some kind of manners because it's just, Pew's like, why? He's a fucking clone. He doesn't know what manners are.
Mm.
And he's like, no, dude. Like we're out here, we're in the middle of space. Please and thank you would be nice, right? Or just like an acknowledgement that I'm a human being. There's a quote, the one that made me tear up.
Yeah, let's get to that. Let's get you crying on the pod.
Yeah. Well, it's actually when he says that he loves him, right? Like, Pew looked up with angry eyes. Martin is my friend. We've worked together. He's a good man. He stopped. After a while, he said, yeah, I love him. Why did you ask that? Calf said nothing, but he looked at the other man. His face was changed as if he were glimpsing something he had not seen before. His voice, too, was changed. How do you... But Pew couldn't tell him. I don't know, he said. It's practice, partly. I don't know. We're each of us alone, to be sure. What else can you do but hold your hand out in the dark? I was like, damn.
Bars.
How true is that? So such bars right there.
But that makes me think as well, like, you know, sometimes I think, let's talk about love, David.
Okay, I'm down.
So I feel like when people are young, what you love in another person is what is sort of what you appreciate in yourself. And then I think like a more like holistic, bigger view of love is like, you know, you love someone when they're completely different for their differences to yourself. Like, so what might attract you to someone initially would be, oh, they're like me. They have the same interests. They, you know, for gay men, it's like, oh, he looks like me. That's a joke. But it's, there's a lot of that.
Is it?
There's a lot of like, brotherly, fraternal, twincest vibe going on there with a lot of gay men. But no, like, so you see similarities, but like love isn't about similarities. I think like it extends beyond that. And it's like you end up loving someone like deeply when you appreciate how different they are from you and like they're not the same thing as you. I think that's and I think that's what that story is getting at. And like that's the clone is learning that or has to learn.
Dude, that is so smart and so profound. I 100% agree. I couldn't agree more. I think that that's what I notice. I mean, my wife and I are very extremely different people. Extremely different to the point that a lot of people
She's nice.
wonder. She's nice, yeah. She's nice and gentle and delicate, and then there's me, and she's just always like, what has he done now? What has he done? But tying that into what this story is about is so brilliant, which I hadn't thought of before you said it, but it's 100% true because you literally are presented in this story with you know, the clones have a connection, certainly, 100%, to the point that it's psychic,
Mm.
right? But the clones don't love each other. And if we're using the clone as a metaphor for humanity, it's kind of showing like that's why you can't love yourself
Mm-hmm.
either. That's why nobody loves themselves, because you are just someone who is you, who feeds you back your own bullshit. And it's impossible to love somebody who does that. So I think that analysis is spot on.
Mm. I mean, what can you give yourself really? Like, because if you know,
right.
if part of loving is giving, like, what can you actually give yourself? Like, it's all there.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's nothing to give, you know?
I really like that the John Crow females just look like him still, but they're women. It's like, that's so busted.
He could be a very handsome man. Like, well, a
It
handsome
could
man
be.
doesn't make a handsome woman, of course. Or maybe it does, but it doesn't make a beautiful woman. But
Usually not. Usually not.
I find beauty in most people is like a delicate balance of feminine and masculine traits. You know, like you don't want a man who's too like Cro-Magnon looking, and you don't want a woman who's too like, you know, all soft edges, you know. I think it's like a balance of both, you know.
I've always liked a bitch that just looks mean and manly. It's kryptonite.
Yeah. As you've said
If they
before,
look
as you said
if they look
before,
really angry.
Yeah. The Getting Lit podcast is a place for straight men to be gay, and that's pretty gay. You want like manly women, so
Yeah, basically, yeah. Yeah. I just want a bro with boobs. That's it.
bro with boobs. There's plenty of those around.
Yeah. Maybe where you're from, dude, but not here.
There's plenty there. I've been to the US. Just go to like Popeyes or something. You'll find some bros with boobs.
Behind the counter. We ain't got that.
Okay, so yeah, what other notes did you have on 9 Lives?
So on 9 Lives, I really liked the description of the fucked up planet that they're on.
Yes.
That they're there to mine.
Yeah.
The hellmouth, and how it's just this. It just seems like an absolute nightmare of constant earthquakes and belching basalt, and it just seems like the most awful place in the world that you could be. And Pew and Martin are just like, and then once the crew comes, we'll move on to the next one after we've made our maps. And that's their whole lives. Science fiction at its best really instills in me a sense of profound existential dread, where if we are going to be exploring the stars, but it's not in a Star Trek kind of way, it's just going from one fucked up, ugly hellhole to the next, and taking years and years to do that, and everybody dying back on Earth. It's just like, why on earth would we do that? And it's well done in this story because it's not overplayed, and it's not it's not overly doomer or anything like that, but everything just seems like it kind of sucks.
But that's also why like the relationship between Pew and Martin is so sweet, because like, you know, that's all they have is each other in this kind of like, you know,
and I also like that there's no Irish people in the future. There's like, no, she goes, there's Irish Americans, but no Irish, not after the third famine. There's like a huge famine that wiped out the Irish again.
Yeah, because the reason they went into cloning was that the planet basically depopulated. So because there were you know, famines and lots of people starved. And I like that description of how people who were they describing? I can't remember who they were describing, but they looked gaunt and like underfed. And were they talking about Irish Americans? I can't.
Maybe. Yeah,
I can't remember.
It might have been. Because I think that was the only real talk about back home.
Yeah,
how
yeah.
because Calf was asking them like what are you? Because Pew's Welsh and he's like, what is that? Is that like Irish? And he's like, oh no. There's no Irish people anymore.
They're all dead. Except for
They're
like
all dead.
except for like monks, like that just still live in
Yeah.
the
Oh,
monasteries
right.
apparently.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. The monks survive somehow.
yeah.
But yeah. Yeah, it just seems like everything is fucking awful in the future.
But I like that because
Which
like
she doesn't always do, by the way.
yeah,
Ursula
yeah.
doesn't always do that.
No. I like that as well because the normal thing that people do with population and stuff in science fiction is that there's too many people. But like this is a really
Right.
and it was really it's sort of like offhand comment. Like it's a context thing. It's not really delved into. But the idea that oh no, actually in the future the Earth will be depopulated. There'll be fewer people.
Mhm.
Like that was really I really like that.
I could see
She
that for us too, you know? I mean, in 40 years, there'll be fewer people, probably.
you think
Probably.
Mm,
Probably so.
more
After
clones
the war. Yeah. After the war, for sure.
after the war?
Mhm.
Are you getting drafted or are you too old? What's your country's?
I'm too old, bro. I think 35 is the max.
I
So
think I'm too old
I
too. Yes.
we both aged out. We get to go watch everybody else die. We can have opinions from home. We could do the Mark Wahlberg thing and watch videos on, online of, young people getting just turned into Swiss cheese. And then we can be like, if that was me, bro, would not have gone down like that. Not have gone.
You know what though? Like I've heard, I've seen this. It's online, so take it with a grain of salt. But like lots of people I've sort of seen saying, they served in the military and they got out and they're not encouraging the next generation to do it because the military has been taken over by like woke maniacs. So
Mhm.
in the administration like section of it, and I've heard that there in the US military, probably here as well, there's a kind of crisis of enlistment. Like not enough people are enlisting, so
Yep.
they
That's
probably
why
are.
the draft will come back.
Yeah,
Yep.
that's why they probably will conscript.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. They can't convince people to do it. I did with my students who are all juniors, so anywhere from 16 to 18. I do bell ringers with them.
What's that?
And one of the it's like how you open class, just a quick short writing assignment.
Oh, okay.
And my question was, do you think the draft is a good idea? And I have 120 students, and only one turned in a bell work that said they thought it was a good idea.
Mm,
So nobody's for it, but I guess it
mm,
doesn't really matter if you're for
mm.
it or
I
against
don't
it.
think
If they do it.
I don't think many people were for it when it last happened, but
No.
maybe there was still a sense of like pride in your country, so more people were
Mhm.
probably
Mhm.
maybe in a class of how many people was it?
Of mine,
Yeah.
120.
You teach 120 students
Yeah.
at once.
Oh no. Split up over
Oh,
six
like
classes. Yeah.
fucking hell.
Yeah.
Wow.
No. It's
Yeah, no,
it's
okay.
about 20 per class.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So only one. Okay. All right. I got it. So yeah, I imagine that back in the day, like last time I had was Vietnam, right? So like there are probably like maybe a quarter students that would say it was a good idea. Like, but now that's all been wiped out because people
Hmm.
don't have any faith in their country anymore.
Hmm. Oh, and it's a bad idea too. I mean,
Mm,
Korea has a draft that everybody has to participate in, and they have a terrible military.
mm,
Their military sucks, and it's
mm.
because it's all kids who want to do TikToks. They don't want to be in the fucking army,
Yeah.
and
Make them
you
do
know,
TikToks for the army.
yeah, dude. This is how you interrogate a prisoner.
The TikTok brigade.
Yeah.
Um, oh my God. Yeah, the description of the planet, I agree. Like the planet's called Libra, which is a female coded name.
Mhm.
and also it's very volcanic. And the way she described it was like, yeah, it was hell.
Yeah,
And
basically.
unsurprising that clones died. The other thing that this pushed home was the idea of experience as well. Like Pew and Martin are very experienced, and though the clones are kind of cloned from like a genius person and they work incredibly well together, they all end up dying. So they all end up getting taken out by this planet. Whereas these guys, you get the sense have like hopped from like planet to planet like 20 times or so, you know. So there's a kind of, you know, very, very sort of pragmatic idea about, you know, experience and real rather than like genetic smarts or whatever, you know?
Yeah. And they mention when the clones all died too. They're talking about it and they're wondering, you know, if they weren't clones and they weren't all thinking with one mind, would more of them have actually survived? Because would they have been able to act more in self-interest? So for somebody who's a pacifist anarchist, I really do think that Le Guin was definitely not communistic in any way, shape, or form. And I think this was, I think the way that she writes about these clones was such kind of detached horror, just exploring what it would be like. Because it doesn't seem cool to be a clone at all. She does seem to be very put off by the hive mind. Oh, I had that thought while I read this. This is a perfect story about echo chambers too, sort of modern echo chambers, because the clones don't. It's like, what if you had 10 people who all thought exactly the same way as you?
Welcome to the media.
Yeah.
And academia,
right? I mean,
and basically everything that runs all the narratives in our lives. Yeah,
exactly. And they're brilliant, super intelligent, which the people we're talking about are not. But at the end of the day, it doesn't save them, and it doesn't really seem to help in any way, right? Like the people who survive are, you know, Pew and Martin, who get into little lovers spats about snoring and leaving the toilet seat up and shit those are the guys who live because they're so different and they manage to thrive in spite of that rather than being this kind of perfect symbiotic unit. See, this is why, not to go too far down that rabbit hole, but like the communistic people, what are they all about, bro? Like, do any of them really think that that's going to work? Do you think that they're all lying, or do you think that they are just stupid?
Again, maybe column A, column B. I'm a bit of both. But I don't know. I think a lot of people are very deluded and they think that, well, this is the whole, we don't need to go down this route because both of us have many times before, but this is the problem with the last few years, which is that instead of taking the world as it is, as grandmother Ursula does, people apply these models and these theories and like extrapolate out from models and theories and abstractions to what might happen but they say that that's what will happen. But it's like, you know, communism might sound nice, like in theory, it's the old canon, but in practice, you know, if everyone just adhered to the theory, it would work. And like, I'm not even sure that is true, but you know, like, I think again, it's like we were saying before, it's like this utopian ideal that people have, they strive for. It's like, well, that's better than what we've got. I'm like, is it?
Yeah, I'm not sure it is. I don't think I would like that very much.
No,
But
just leave me alone. That's all I want.
Yeah, I really do think that if we're going to take, you know, the pacifist anarchism thing and divest it of its unreachable utopianism, I do really think it's a perfectly fine way to live because it's basically saying, hey, war is bad and also leave me alone.
Mm-hmm.
That
Mm-hmm.
seems perfectly fine to me.
Yeah. Yeah. Agree. Um, yeah, anything else to say about this one, or should we move on?
No, I think that's it. This, like I said, it was my favorite. And again, I could talk about the writing for each story, but I mean, I just really do think that it's so perfectly paced. She knows exactly when something needs to happen, when to slow down, when to summarize. It's just really a masterful short story in
Mm-hmm.
a writing sense.
Yeah, it's so good. One more thing as well. With clones, and you know how we were saying before that they have sex with each other. Would you have sex with your clone? And do you think it's
Uh,
gay? Do you think it was gay if you had sex with your male clone?
if I had, oh, if it, and it was a dude,
Yeah, because it's just like jerking off,
yeah.
right?
Mm, no, I think it's gay. I think it's still gay. No, I'm pretty sure that's gay. I, I wouldn't want to have sex with my own clone because I don't find myself
Yeah, but
attractive.
what if your clone was like, "Come on, bro, help me out"?
If I got to
It's like,
experience what my wife experiences when I'm like, please.
just one morsel.
Yeah, I would definitely not do it. I would be like, dude, you are pathetic. Oh,
I
it's
mean, I
too
probably
funny.
would, but I'm gay, so whatever.
Sure. You get the clone to shave the mustache,
Yeah,
and
but
then it's different
then it's a
enough.
little bit different. Yeah. Um,
Yeah.
oh, by the way, you know, we're both in the Rare Candy Discord. Did you see the other day where some guy was like absolutely shocked that I was gay?
No, I didn't
Because
see
like listens
this.
to podcasts and everything. I was like, wait, you're gay? Funny.
You should have been like, "Oh, psych, bro. No, it's cool. You can still listen."
Anyway,
Uh,
so the next one chronologically is, hang on, I have to consult my notes, is Omelas or Omelas.
Omelas.
Omelas. You schlemiel, get
Omelas.
over here. Okay, so the ones who walk away from Omelas, I have done this on the podcast. This was on the very first episode when I used to have two other hosts, and so in the first episode, as an introduction to all of us, we each chose a short story, and one of the other hosts chose Omelas, and we talked about it for a bit. But I feel like looking at it now, it's good to revisit because I feel like my views on this have changed. So basically, probably a lot of people are familiar with it. The idea is that there's this utopian city. Everyone is happy. It's wonderful. It's bright. It's shiny. You know, people ride horses and, you know, they're very liberated. It's a very sex positive place too. Everyone's beautiful. The children are happy. But this kind of utopian shining city relies on the suffering of one really wretched child basically living in its own filth. And so that there's even a line in the short story that says these are the terms. So the city requires the suffering of this child, who sort of lives in this little room. Sometimes people from Omelas, the citizens of Omelas, go down and sort of look at it. And the title comes from the few people who sort of look at it and then walk out of the city, never to be seen again. And it's often set in like philosophy courses and shit like that, because there's a sort of ethical dimension to it. Like, does happiness, this a society or culture that is thriving, does that necessarily depend on the suffering of others? Lots of people like view this as a kind of capitalist critique. critique of capitalism. There's lots of stuff here. It's a very short story, but it's been spoken about so much. And David, you recently said it for your class. What did the young students of today think about this story?
They all said, "Fuck that kid." Like they were like, "I'm
Are you
living
serious?
in the city." I'm dead serious. I am dead serious. I was taken aback and I was shocked. First hour when it happened, I was like, okay, maybe that was an anomaly. And then just throughout the day, everybody was like, no, like
Wow.
who cares? And then I brought up their phones and Foxconn factories and slaves mining, and they are just brutal. They're just like, well, it's not me, so don't give a shit, whatever. I was like, oh, okay, all right. I guess that's that then. It did not lead to the fruitful discussions that I was hoping that it would lead to. There are
That's
a few things
fascinating. That's fascinating.
it is
to me.
fascinating.
Yeah.
It really is, and it's also my teaching style is to ask a lot of questions and not really argue, or I do try to trouble what they say. So I didn't argue, and I just kind of listened, and I think it has more. I don't think it's a commentary though on today's generation. I think it's more just kids. I really do think that until you live, you're never really going to say like, well, I would walk away. I would leave, because they live with their parents. Like they don't even know what walking away looks like.
Yeah.
That's the scariest thing ever.
Well,
but
they don't know how scary it is. Like, like walking away from.
Well,
everyone.
it is.
Yeah.
It's a big blank space. Yeah. So you're right. I mean, they wouldn't really even know with that where to begin. But also, I do think, first of all, something that I don't see brought up enough is how brilliantly the story is written, with Ursula as the main character, who is actually telling you the story and being very clear that she's making it up as she's going along.
That's
how she's like.
I'm glad you brought that up, because this is something that I wanted to bring up as well. This, to me, on this reading, like because in an episode soon, I'm going to be doing Italo Calvino. And this to me read like the first section of If on a Winter's Night, a Traveler, where he is kind of like, addressing you, the reader, as he's sort of like making up this story. She did this before him. Like that was written like, so Omelas, I think, was written in 73 and that was written in 79, I think. So like it's very innovative in that way, like direct addressing of the reader in this sort of, I wouldn't classify it as like postmodern, because like whatever the fuck does that word mean these days? But
no, I wouldn't either. Yeah,
it's doing that sort of like playful thing. Where she's and then she describes all of this stuff, and the thing I love about it, and it's kind of funny as well, is she's like, or imagine something that looks good to you, like
I think that's great, and I really wish more people did that. By the way, I wish all books just did that, where the author was present,
a character,
even in in a third person narrative. The author is like, and you know what I mean. It's I could describe this, but you've all seen a mountain before, right? You know what that shit looks like. You have the internet. I also do think that, because I read it 6 times, I don't think the story is necessarily as simple as, is this good or bad? I think that because walking away, if you were to really think about it morally, walking away potentially is just as flawed a moral choice as staying and enjoying the fruits of it, because the kid is just as fucked. Either way, it's not a story about the ones who have a revolution against Omelas or fight back against Omelas. It's like there are people who just say, no, it's not for me. But I do think that in our troubled times, in these capitalized times, the idea of walking away is very interesting. And Le Guin's ability, as we said before, to not to have that kind of cultural relativist, not overly moralizing or judgmental stance on things, I think is really interesting here because how many issues that we have that we're presented with on a day-to-day basis could we potentially just walk away from? That becomes really interesting because what Omelas feels like to me is an anti-solutionist parable, right? It's against the idea that you, as an individual, can come up with and then enact a solution that can fix a problem. It's the idea that there are some things that you just have to wash your hands and walk away from. And it might not always be, I mean, I don't even see it as throwing your cell phone away or not eating meat or however else this story has been presented as. But it's more like, to me, the people who walk away and the people who stay in novellas are largely doing similar things in that it doesn't change the material aspect of it. But the ones that walk away are the ones who are deciding to, I guess, not enjoy the fruits of that bad shit. Right. So to me, this story really does not feel as strictly black and white, good and evil, moralistic as a lot of people who I've heard talk about the story seem to think that it is.
Yeah, and there's also like this one way you could read this as well is because Ursula is very interested in Eastern philosophy, as we sort of talked about. She's really into Taoism. She translated the how do you say that? I Ching? Yeah, I Ching. And she was also interested in Buddhism as well. I mean, like a lot of people her age, that generation was. But
sure. Yeah.
But to me, like there's a certain amount of I wouldn't say it's Buddhist, but like that idea, the core idea of Buddhism being that like suffering is just this like existential fact of life, right? You could read that into this as well, that it's just there. Like it doesn't matter how much you you adorn your street, you festoon your streets with like garlands and lights, and how many wonderful like races, bread and circuses you have in your beautiful shining city on the hill. Suffering is a fact of life. You will never get rid of it as long as there are humans. So there's that kind of more, I think that's a very, probably didn't intend this, but like that's a more capacious reading of it as well. That like, just suffering will just always exist. Like, I think people do fixate on the one child thing, but you could also just say that child is like a stand-in for the concept of suffering itself. And that attempts to, and that's, you can even, I'm starting to get more convinced by this reading now that I just threw it out there, but like the people who walk away from Omelas kind of know that as well. And like suffering exists and there's not much I can do about it. So I'm not going to, enjoy life. I'm going to go out there and probably suffer myself, so it's that very kind of philosophical way of like also probably the problem of evil as well, like what but yeah, I think there's some kind of Eastern, like a lot of people when they read this, they do it in like either creative writing or English classes or philosophy classes, and it's very analytical Western kind of philosophy is in it. But I think there's enough like Eastern stuff in here that can make it a bit interesting with the Buddhist stuff.
I think so too. And I think that the ones that are walking away are not necessarily walking away as a statement. Nobody might even know that they're missing, and they're not doing anything to change anything. And that's why I think that this story is so important as an anti-solutionism thing, because to me, what the story says is that there are problems for which there are no solutions. And walking away from them, if you think that walking away is a solution, you're missing the entire point. It's just that there are some things that you have to not even accept. Just walk away from them. Just go do something else. You can't solve it. You can't fix it. You have a perfect society whose perfection depends on the suffering of one dirty, mentally feeble child who can never feel love. And it's like the wise ones recognize the truth of this, right? Not the evil of it, but the truth of it. And so then choose to walk away content in their knowledge that that is the way that the world works, right? And maybe they are walking away because they're seeking out a little bit of suffering of their own. Maybe if there's a moral stance in it, it's the idea of pushing that suffering all onto one person instead of taking some on yourself.
Yeah, so this would have been written when she was like probably late 40s, early 50s. So, but it does get at a thing which is I think it's a young person thing, which is I don't know, I don't want to say idealism because that's a bit trite, but the idealism of youth, like where you see an injustice in the world and it needs to be righted. And I think like what this plays into what we were talking about before with her, like just looking at things the way they are, observing cultures, and not necessarily judging them, just saying that that's their practice. So I think she's a thinker of like amazing clarity, and it's just it comes through in her stories. But so yeah, like a young person, well, up until now apparently, but like maybe when I was younger, when I first read this, I was like,
me too, totally.
I would totally walk away. Like
me
it's
too,
that,
dude.
Yeah,
I would have been like, yeah, I would have left. I would have left.
Yeah, because that's like
that would have been so me.
Yeah, that's like the punk rock thing to do, man. But once you've lived a bit longer, you kind of come to realize that it's not that you become okay with injustices. It's just that you come to see. I'm trying to put this delicately. You come to see that there is actually evil in the world, and there's not much you can actually do about it. But what I think a lot of young people would take away from this situation or this premise would be that this isn't just we have to do something about it, but the something about it in this story completely undermines whatever the young person's view on the injustice would be, because they don't do anything about it. They just walk away from it.
There was one kid who is 6'2", and he's a sort of a country kid. I love this guy. He's great. Always wears a trucker cap that teachers are yelling at him to take off. He's got long stringy hair, just a big beefy corn-fed boy. And he was like, I'd kick down that door. I was like, oh, you kicked down would you take the kid? He's like, fuck yeah, I would. I'd take that kid. We get out of there. We'd all leave. I was like, now we're talking. I like you. But see, and the thing is that I still would say at 37 that I would walk away. But to me, what walking away means is very different. Walking away is not a punk rock like, oh, I just refuse to participate in it. It's more of a disengagement with the question itself,
Mm. Mm.
right? A kind of like, I don't have to. This is going to sound really bad, but it's similar to like deleting a social media account or something like that, right? It kind of feels that way, right? Where
Mm.
it's where you just don't have to even like
You
you're not
reject the
saying it's good or
hypothesis.
bad. I reject the hypothesis. Thank you.
Mm.
Perfect. Yes,
Mm.
absolutely. It's the ones who walk away from Omelas are the ones who are rejecting the hypothesis.
Yeah. I've done that. Maybe I would walk away now too. Like, because I've been in so many conversations when people have tried to like engage me on some kind of question that I literally don't care about. And like, it has no, bearing on my life. And that's what I say. I'm like, I
reject the hypothesis.
the hypothesis that I need to have anything to do with this idea, like, or this event or whatever.
Who was that guy that it was like this meme, this kind of fat? They were doing those interviews on American campuses, and they find this like fat dude with a ponytail. What have you seen this?
Is this, are you comparing this person to me? It doesn't seem very flattering, David.
No. They ask him a question. It's like, are you like for or against Biden or something like that?
Mm.
And he's like, neither. And the guy says,
I love that.
He's like, you have to pick one. And he's like, no, I don't.
Yeah.
Like, and somebody did like, the yes meme with the guy with the beard,
Yes.
but there's one like where it's this guy, he's a fat dude with like a ponytail, and it's just like, no, I don't. Like, it's like total Bartleby the Scrivener. I prefer not to.
No, that's true. And like, social media has convinced people that they have to weigh in quotes, on fucking everything. Like, no, you don't. You don't. Yep. You really don't.
Yeah, I prefer not to.
Yeah.
And the whole Bartleby would be. Have you done Bartleby yet?
No, I haven't. No.
That would be a fun story.
Glenn's already done that one, hasn't he?
Has he really?
Has he? I think he has. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I'll have to just listen to that episode then.
Mm.
But that's such a perfect metaphor because like it drives that Scrivener fucking crazy that he won't say yes or no, but just that he prefers not to. We should all be walking away from Omelas, and we should all be saying I prefer not to.
Yeah. And that's literally me. Like, obviously I'm not like a loser like the Bartleby guy, but like
right.
Like, I wouldn't do that to people. But
Matt is cool Bartleby.
Chad Bartleby.
Chad Bartleby.
Yeah, so, but yeah, it's a good philosophy to live by, especially if it has no bearing on your life. Like,
yeah,
why?
Just walk away.
Yeah, just walk away. But yeah, anything else to say on? I'm so interested that like your students were just like fucking.
Yeah, no, they do not care.
Do they have anything else to say though, like about the story? Like, did they like it? Like, what did they get out of it?
Some of them did. A lot of them liked the sex cult aspect of it, like the sex temple where they all ritualistically fuck. They were like, a lot of them were like, yeah, that part's cool.
The kids are all right.
And as I was reading that, I was like, please don't tell your parents about what I'm reading to you, right? Because I read it. I couldn't find a good audio of it. So I read it and I was like, here's what we're about to talk about, please. But a lot of them thought that the kid part was sad, and there was kind of silence. So a part of me wonders too if some of their vociferously anti that kid stuff was kind of a coping mechanism too. Like, I wonder if it didn't make them a little bit uncomfortable, especially after I told them about Foxconn and how their cell phones were made and shit like that. So I think it made them think. A lot of them think in my class, which is more than they do in most other classes. So they've told me. I started in on Thursday because we're reading Jurassic Park, and there's a chapter where John Hammond and Wu are debating about whether the dinosaurs are real or not. And so we had a whole conversation about what real was. And so many of them were just like, Mr. O, please don't do this right now. Because I was like asking them Ship of Theseus questions and shit. They were
Yes,
like,
let's go.
I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this.
I love that you're doing Jurassic Park. You're just gonna be
Oh,
you're just stealing like curriculum source stuff from Gain of Fiction.
basically, yeah, yeah. We're gonna do we're gonna do airframe next. Talk about airports. or, no, they've talked about sphere. Oh, state of fear.
State of
That would be
Fear.
a
Oh
good
my
one.
God,
That
you'd
would
get
be a good
fired.
one. I would get well. I'm in Oklahoma, so no, I
No,
wouldn't.
maybe not.
They,
Yeah.
they, they would actually be like, he's already. This is actually a teacher. I would get on libs of TikTok, but like the good version, where like he's teaching them that climate change is fake. Which, by the way, that book more than anything else that I've read kind of made me think climate change is fake.
Mm-hmm. You heard it here first, folks. Like no, you wouldn't be that wouldn't be libs of TikTok. That would be like libs of Blue Sky.
Yeah, right.
No, or whatever. Chuds of Blue
It's
Sky.
so
That's what it
it's
would
so
be.
funny too. Since we're down this rabbit hole, I gave the kids a Vanity Fair article about Michael Crichton
Mm-hmm.
to sort of introduce them to him, and it was after his death. It was upon the release of Dragon Teeth,
Mm-hmm.
his 2019 posthumous novel, and they talk about State of Fear in that, and they ask Steven Spielberg about it, and Spielberg says, "Yeah, I just think that Michael was curious about the science, and I think that if he'd lived, he would have probably changed his mind." I was like, "No, he wouldn't."
My God, could you imagine if he was alive during COVID?
It would have been so sick. No, it would have banged so hard if Michael Crichton was alive during COVID, because he's one of us. That's why he's the patron saint of Gain of Fiction, because he would have had a field day with COVID.
Mm-hmm. So good. And the tallest author ever, I think, as well.
6'9".
6'9". That's a huge bitch.
That is a huge bitch. And apparently he was also very soft-spoken and gentle, but he would intimidate the fuck out of everybody.
Yeah.
On sets, and he would go up to them and very gently be like, "I would prefer you to be standing over there." And people would be like, "Oh God, oh jeez."
Yeah. You have to like I do feel sorry for tall guys sometimes, because you have to like I feel like you would have to do a lot of work to not be intimidating. Like you would have to like carry yourself in a particular way. Sam's like that. Sam is a bit like Sam is just he's huge, but he's like a big teddy bear, and he always makes you feel kind of cozy and safe. But like I've met other guys who are really tall that you're just like, please don't hurt me.
So big.
You're so big. You're twice the size of me. Yeah. Anything else to say about Omelas?
No, I think we just had the best analysis of it.
Yeah.
Of any
Once
podcast.
again, the definitive analysis, like we did the definitive analysis of Gene Wolfe with Kelby.
There's like 300 episodes of Alzabo soup, but we did the best one in 4 episodes.
In 4 episodes. That's right. I need to pee. Shall we come back and do the last story?
Yeah, I'll do it too.
Yep. Do it. love this.
Yeah, me too.
Mm.
Podcasting is fun.
It's so fun. You do like 5, don't you?
No, two. I do 2. Feels like 5 sometimes. And the one I do with Chris is just like it's mostly his just his time to shine.
Yeah,
So
no,
I
I
just kind of
listened to
show
a
up.
couple of episodes a couple of weeks ago. I love it.
Mhm.
It's kind of yeah, it's interesting. It's unclassifiable.
Yeah, it's a really weird show.
Mm.
And we had a really big audience to start off, and we have moved in the opposite direction over
Why?
time.
Why is that?
I think because of our opinions. I think we started off with a big lib audience, and then we had our first big drop off when we did an episode where we talked about how empathy is
Fake, gay.
fake. Yeah, fake and gay. Hmm. Yeah, essentially. Like that was the first huge drop off, and then yeah, Chris is just he's a really smart guy, and but he's a lib from the 1980s.
Mm.
You know, I mean,
Yeah,
which is
kind
a
of like
different
Crichton.
thing. Kind of like Crichton.
Mm.
Crichton is so fucking cool, man. He's so cool, and I'm learning so much by reading Jurassic Park 6 times, and I've got Congo over there. I've become obsessed with plot, and maybe this is more stuff for your what are you calling it? Back page?
Back matter.
Back matter.
I
Back
like
page
this,
is the
I like the subtle
is
gay like vibes of it as well.
yeah.
Because my name's
Back
Matt
page
as
was
well.
the oh back matter. I like it. No, it's good. It's
Yeah.
good. Yeah, I'll save all that for then, I guess.
Yeah, well,
Talk about
I do want to talk about your book as well, because it's funny that you kind of have gone in this direction of like being a plot based, plot obsessed writer. Because one of the things I liked about we can talk about this in the Patreon maybe, but I'll flag it now, is yeah, clearly the Gene Wolfe influence in The Second Gods Fair No Better was
Yeah.
there. Like
it's very noticeable.
but I
It's just
like
oh,
but I like one of the things I like about what you're doing with that series, and I hope you continue to do it, is that like anything that you're experiencing or reading, you're just folding into this narrative. And I think that's great. Like lots of writers are very like precious about like, you know, there's people who don't read any fiction when they're writing a novel. I'm just like, I don't get that.
that's so
Just
silly.
like-
That's very silly.
Just like like if you're afraid that it's gonna influence you, just let it influence you. Who cares?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And that's how that series exists, and that's
Hmm.
how it's going to continue to exist. So my plan for it, that book 2 just came out and is not really selling very well. Book 3 will come out so I'm going to do one a year of that series. And that's what it's going to be every time. It's going to be whatever I've been ingesting for that year. It's all going to get distilled into a 40 to 50,000 word short novel. And I fully don't expect it to sell very well until it's done in 8 years. But that's kind of how it acts for me. I'm not, rushing to, do 4 a year so I can get to 10 and then stop doing it. It's just like, okay, in June or July, I'll start compiling all the stuff for it, be done with it in September, and then release it in December, just every year. And it doesn't, right now I'm working on bigger books, like bigger, more plot-based books, but every year.
Your Tim Powers books.
Yeah, exactly. My Tim exactly. My Tim Powers books. But the Gods books will just kind of be there. And then 10 years from now, I'll do like 2 or 3 big omnibus editions of them, because they'll be at that point 500,000 words or something like that. But yeah, there's no rush. For a while there, I thought I was going to do that. I was going to put out like one every 3 or 4 months. And then I thought, I think they're better if I slow down and
Mm.
just like make each one a kind of fun, distilled snapshot of where I am in that particular year. So yeah.
So the next one's going to be about like talking apes or
Yeah, could be. Could be.
very,
Yeah.
very plot
Yeah.
based.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It'll definitely have
About how climate change is fake.
climate change is fake. Yep. Yep. I have a really cool monster for part 3 that I'm excited to write called The King of All Tears.
Oh, nice. I like that.
And there'll be a kind of grudge Ringu Sadako girl in book 3. And then the rest I'll figure out in a few months when I start it. So
I love that it's like set in Oklahoma as well. I love that.
mhm.
I love when people get
Mhm.
very specific, like because so much science. I guess it's cyberpunk, so it's cyberpunk is science fiction, but you know what I mean when I say there's a difference between those two things. Like when you say science fiction, it's like
Mhm.
the thing with Kelby's book with Mercy, how like he put it
Yeah.
in this science fiction thing, and all the science fiction fans were like, "What the fuck is this?" You know, like because
They hated that
it
shit.
was too cyberpunky, I guess.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
so there is a bit of a difference between capital S science fiction and cyberpunk, but I like how specific the locale is as well. Do you have like a where the city actually is? Is it just over Oklahoma City or is it somewhere else? Is
Yeah,
there?
it's Oklahoma City. It's
Yeah.
Oklahoma City,
Mm.
basically. Yeah. I mean, it's supposed to just be um there's the series began because I had this idea for a like crew of guys. There's this Kiowa tradition
Mm.
that has been confirmed by students actually, because I asked them about it. But whenever a tornado is coming, you go into your front yard and you toss a tomahawk down in the dirt, and that splits that like diverts the tornado from your
I love that.
house. And so the series began like Cyclone Cities. The idea is that there are kind of like sentient tornadoes around it that are trying to find their way in, um, because there's something buried in the heart of the city that the tornadoes want. And Zuno and Kentaro and a few other characters are all part of like this sort of Akira motorcycle gang that fights tornadoes outside of the. And so the first iteration of the book was that, and where Dying World begins is like I realized I had to go back, 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 back. So these characters are all going to go on their arcs, but eventually it's going to be them versus tornado, like living tornadoes,
Awesome.
basically. Um, and I don't know what book that's going to be and who's still going to be alive once I get there, but
Is that
that's
what
the
it's like?
eventual goal.
Is that what it's like living in Oklahoma? Just feel like you're fighting tornadoes all the time.
Yes. Yes. And they are terrifying.
Mm.
I mean, I've lived here most of my life, and they don't get any less scary when you see them or hear them or have to hide from them. Um, they're super fucked up, and they're very unique. They're
Mm.
unique to specifically this part of America in the world. I mean,
Yeah.
they happen. There are anomalies here and there, but other places don't get tornadoes like we do,
Yeah, we don't
which
get
is
tornadoes. I grew up in a place in North Queensland, which is like the South in the US, but
Mhm.
and we get lots of cyclones, which is the Southern Hemisphere version of a hurricane. It goes the other way
Mhm.
though. So and they are really scary because they're
Mhm.
massive, massive storms that are like just
Yep.
this big, like eye. And then you get probably it's similar with tornadoes, but if because they start out at sea and then they hit landfall, and then if it hits your city, you get these massive 100K winds, like insane shit.
Oh yeah.
And
Oh yeah.
then as it keeps going, the eye usually with a big storm the eye can be like almost as big as a city, and so
Hmm.
it'll just be completely calm, and then if it keeps going you'll get the other end of it. It's so fucked up. Like,
hmm
and then
No, that's tornadoes, dude. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, and then
It gets
after
oddly calm.
and then after that, it's just rain because what ends up happening is that when the sea is no longer feeding it, it kind of dissipates, but dissipates into like what's called a rain depression. So it just rains and rains and rains and like there's flooding. And so you get to the point where like all the damage from the wind happens, but then you can't fix any of it because like there's all this flash flooding like for weeks on end.
Awesome. Awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, Oklahoma is very similar.
Mm.
Its weather is just like sudden and violent and frightening, and then the next day it'll be sunshine
Mm.
and moderate temperatures, like nothing happened. And
Mm-hmm.
you'll just walk out and there'll be destroyed houses everywhere. I've seen one real tornado in my life. I was driving from Tulsa to Oklahoma City, and the sky turned green,
Okay.
which I knew was bad. And I was the only car on the highway, which is also bad. And I see a cop coming up behind me really fast. And then I'm like, okay, was I speeding? Hopefully I'm good. And the cop just blows past me. Just like he's saying, fuck that shit. We got to get out of here. So there's a toll booth between Tulsa and Oklahoma City. And for whatever reason, semi trucks have stopped in each stall. I guess as a safe place. I guess they
Mm.
got out and ran to the kind of hut that shelters the employees. So I park my car by the hut and I get out and the wind is all crazy. And I try to open the door to the hut and it's locked. And so I'm like, all right, cool. Guess I'm fucked. So I go back and I get in my car, and parked next to me is a U-Haul with two dudes like exactly my age. Like we're all the idiots who got caught in this. And so we look at each other and we're just like, and out in the field, I see the tornado just like drops down, then moves across, and then goes back up. And I was
Wow.
like, close one.
Oh my God. Yeah.
But I
Th-
remember it was really funny because at the time, my wife and I were having a fight and we were like separated, right? And I saw the tornado and I immediately called her just to kind of be like, "Hey, love you," and which is what I said. But I had fucked up so bad, and she was so not having my bullshit that I called her. I was like, "Hey, just want to say I love you," and then I just heard like click, and I was like, "Oh, yeah, I deserve this. This is how I go out."
oh my God. So
Yep.
interesting. So
hmm
tornadoes are a big part of um your law, so to
Yep.
speak.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. They're real. I really do feel like in a different life, I might have been a storm chaser.
Mm. You know what's
Mm.
funny is like uh on the Patreon with Kelby, we descended into talking about weather as well. We're such middle-aged men.
Mhm. You want
Um
to come on and talk about Ursula Le Guin? It's like 1 hour later, and it's so hot, but sometimes it's so cold.
oh my God. Um I but also weather that's the same all the time is kind of boring. It's wonderful, but
Sure.
like have you ever
Yeah.
been to San Diego?
Yeah,
It's
it's beautiful
literally perfect all year
all the
round.
time. Yeah.
Yeah.
It
So,
would drive me crazy. I feel that way about I had a buddy, a British fella who went to Thailand for a month and he was sending me pictures and it looks
why do you
gorgeous.
go to
But like,
Thailand?
well, he's married
Oh, okay.
and him and his wife were there.
Okay.
Um, they're at this gorgeous resort. You know, he's sending me pictures of, crystal clear blue water and, these islands and whatever. Uh, and I'm like, damn, that looks like paradise. But then I'm like, but it's also just 90 degrees every day.
hmm
That's just Thailand. it doesn't change. I did some Googling because he was sending me these pictures, and I was like, does Thailand ever get cold? And they say Thailand had one cold snap 10 years ago, and it got to like 60 or something. And you see these pictures of all these Thais like, like
Yeah. Well, having said that, I think I'm just genetically predisposed to be in warm weather. That's why I suffer so much where I live, because it can get really hot here, but not in a sustained way. Like it gets really cold here as well. Because it's basically, it's there's the bay that Melbourne is on, and then there's nothing else after it except fucking Antarctica. So like if the wind is coming north, it's really fucking cold. And if the wind is coming in from the desert, then it's really fucking hot. But it's mostly cold. So but anyway, speaking of Antarctica.
Perfect segue.
I will actually just put all of that into the after show. But yes, so the last short story we are talking about from Ursula is a short story called Sur. I think that's the Spanish pronunciation. Sur. So this one is really interesting. I'm very interested to hear your thoughts on this. So this one is probably the least sort of science fictional. It's more of a alternate history, I guess you would classify it. It's basically a woman's journal of so basically she went with a few friends to an all-woman expedition to the South Pole. A girls' trip, yeah. So they depart from Chile, and they get there. They do all this stuff. It's basically her account of this, and they do it all before the first expedition in 1912, which I believe was Shackleton was the first person to get to the South Pole. So what's interesting about this is that I really hope that someone from today never adapts this, because they would adapt it in completely the wrong way. Because what they would do was that they would make it like this girl boss alternate history, like actually girls did it first, like that sort of thing, which is not really what it is. Like on one level, yes, it is that. But on another level, it's doing something else entirely. So basically, the narrator is basically just saying, okay, so we had this mysterious benefactor. They paid for the ship. We were transported to Antarctica. One of the things I really loved about it as well is when they kind of set up camp, they made like this sort of city in the ice wall. That was really cool. And she depicts this almost utopian moment with the women, how like there's no hierarchy. They all discuss everything. Everyone does all their
crew.
They're all crew. Yeah. And then they kind of trek out to the South Pole. And it's basically just describing how they arrive, what they do when they get there, the sort of sights they see. They see the Aurora Australis and all the penguins and things like that. And it just goes through all the hardships of that. But then they return, and she's leaving this journal to just say that that's what they've done. But they don't leave any sign behind that they did it first, because it would hurt the feelings of the men.
Hurt men's feelings. Dude, it is such a fucking great punchline at the end where it's like, but we can't tell dudes because it'll kind of hurt their feelings that we did this first. I was howling, bro. I thought that shit was hilarious.
Yeah, so I like this because it is a kind of utopian story, but in a way it's different, because it's not necessarily fantastical. Like it's not on another world. It's not an imagined fantasy like Omelas or things like that. It's just like this could have happened, but it's sort of like utopian thinking as well. And that's what I find really interesting about it, how it takes this idea of like cooperation and just doing it because it's just an adventure. It's just a girls' trip. And I really love that. It's not making this point that like, women are better than men. which is what it would
Mhm.
turn into if someone adapted this now.
Totally.
Yeah.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I really liked I like all Antarctic expedition stories.
Hmm.
It's my favorite part of Lovecraft
Hmm.
is when they go to Antarctica and it's all cold and they're talking about the latitude and
I
longitude.
think there's shit there. Do you think there's shit there? I think there's like ancient.
100%.
I think there's ancient
Yeah.
civilization shit there.
Without a
Apparently.
doubt. Of
Yeah.
course there is. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I've seen the pictures of the pyramids poking
Hmm.
out.
Hmm.
I mean, there's shit out there. That
Hmm.
shit is real. Um, but there's some Le Guin, again, I think from a writing standpoint, is interesting to look at as somebody who is a very no frills storyteller who can drop uh, just these crazy bars.
Mm.
Because there's one woman who sort of tunnels under the ice and creates ice sculptures
That's like my favorite
underneath them.
scene. Yeah.
Yeah, and she has this line where it's like, uh, they were beautiful, but we couldn't take any of it back, which is what happens when you're carving on water.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, carving on water?
Mm.
If that's not the name of a book, it should be.
Yeah. It's so
Someone
cool.
should jack that.
And then I don't know if it's the same woman, but like there's one who does like a sort of like architectural dome in the ice and like sort of gets so far up to the ice shelf, I guess you'd call it, that it's almost translucent, that you can see the sky. It's like a skylight made out of ice.
Yeah, no, yeah, she calls it a greenhouse. Like
Yeah.
she makes a greenhouse out of the ice. And then there's a woman who gives birth
Yeah.
at one point. Like she's been pregnant the whole time and just kind of hasn't realized that. She's like, oh, my tummy hurt, whatever. And so she gives birth and the baby lives. And then Le Guin, being brutal as fuck, in the last paragraph of the story is like, anyway, that kid died of scarlet fever at 5, but it was cool that and it's this kind of casual depiction of these women not just overcoming the hardships, but kind of thriving in them and becoming creative beings within them and creating life in them, even though that life ends up being snuffed out early. That I feel like it's the most feminist shit I've ever read in my life. And in a way that does not annoy me at all.
Yeah, it's not
which
cringe.
it usually does.
Like it's
not cringe.
To use a
it's like
overused
you
term,
read that and you're like, these chicks are badass.
Yeah.
And then the joke that you mentioned at the end where it's like, but don't tell dudes about this because like they'll probably be upset if they know that we didn't just do it, but we thrived while we were doing it. And the way that they create story while they're out there and how they're going to tell their descendants that, they were pursued by a pack of dogs called Blizzard the whole way back. I was like, oh, women are kind of cool. God damn it.
Yeah, women are cool. I love women. Not in that way, but not in your
not
way.
in a way that in a way that I would ever want to touch them or see them naked or anything like that. But they are cool.
Yeah. And yeah, I loved it. Was so it's a weirdly, even though there's these hardships and this kind of proximity to death, like including the death of the child who was named, the story is kind of named after her in a way, I guess, because she's named Rosa del Sur, Rose of the South. But even with that, it's such a cozy story.
Like, it's so cozy. I that story more than any of the ones that we read, I was like, this could be a novel, and I'd probably read it. Because there is so much, and I love how she just kind of has it as like, yeah, there's a mysterious benefactor, which I really do think like most novels need that. They need a John Hammond for the story to work. It's like was just a rich person who said, sure, you can do this. And then we all go, okay, cool.
It was the early 20th century Peter Thiel. Like
yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. But the story is really not there's not much in terms of character. We don't really know who any of these people are. Sometimes they get drunk and have fun. They drink a lot, actually.
Mm.
Like we made it and we finished all the Clico or whatever it was they were drinking.
Yeah, it was Verclico, yeah.
Yeah. And they encounter penguins, and then the penguins are kind of personified and act as their guide. It's so fun. It's just a fun story to me.
Yeah, and
outside of any meaning, it's just like it's what a story should be, which is fucking fun to read.
Mm-hmm. And it's
a good way to fill an hour.
Yeah, she really. I don't know how much experience Ursula Le Guin has with cold climates, but she really nails that. And that makes the coziness all the more impressive too, because when I think cozy, I don't think cold. Mm-hmm, I think warm. Mm-hmm. I think like, so I think that was what, them building this little town of theirs in the ice was kind of added to that.
And leaving food. It is very cozy. It is very homey. It's like all this shelter from the elements. This
is actually the one person I would trust to do an adaptation of this would be Studio Ghibli. Instead of fucking the thing they did with Earthsea, which was, debatable. But
that was the sun. That was the sun. That was the fail sun.
Yeah.
That was what made Miyazaki come out of retirement. He watched, I'm serious, he watched Earthsea and he had a press conference where he was like, my son,
I disown my son.
He is not fit to run Ghibli. I have to come back because this is really bad.
But and it actually reminded me, did you ever do this thing? I don't know what kind of childhood you had, but did you ever do this thing with your friends when you were a kid where like, I think this is very much if you grew up near nature or woods or bush in our case in Australia, where you would like go out with your friends and like you would find like a grove somewhere and like, let's build a little town here. You would try and like build little shelters and things like that. Like it reminded me of that. We used to do that.
We had that for sure. It was all like in a context of like army.
Yeah.
War.
Yeah.
So we would build bases.
Yeah.
We weren't building a town. We were building a base.
Mm.
And this was our bunk. And these are where our weapons go. And these are where the bitches go. The bitches
are Yes. So it was sort of that vibe. That's why I found it sort of cozy. And I like this it's just a kind of like light alternate history adventure sort of story, and an adventure for the sake of adventure. Like there's not really that's why I think when we mentioned character, like what's the character's motivation? There isn't really any other than just to do it, and that's fine.
She loves Antarctica.
Yeah.
She's obsessed with Antarctica. She wants to go.
Yeah.
And frankly, me too. Have you watched I went down a TikTok rabbit hole recently about the Drake Passage in the North Sea. I want to go so bad.
Well, that's the North Pole.
Well, yeah, but I like that cold adventure type shit. You know what I mean? Rios has said she will not go with me. It costs $10,000. You get on a boat, like shit's sliding back and forth. It's choppy waters, and then you camp on an iceberg with penguins.
Awesome.
Perfect.
Yeah, I actually do want to go to Antarctica. That's probably the most wild place I want to go. Like, because mostly I'm not really I do like nature, but not that sort of nature, because it's like there's nothing. It's literally just ice. But I do really want to visit it before I die.
Bro, we got to get the boys together and go to Antarctica. We got to make a big trip.
We'll do a male version of this story.
Of this. We'll all read the story while we're being tossed around, popping Dramamine. Dude, we should go though. That would be so sick. We could podcast too. We could
Yeah.
do like a Tascam podcast while we're in the North Sea, getting tossed around like
Yeah.
crazy. It'd be
And
good
then,
radio.
yeah. And then do a few on the way back, do a few episodes in New Zealand.
Hmm.
Technically, I'm close to Antarctica, I guess. Like, I don't know if they do flights or boat trips or from here, but I
It has
imagine
to
they
be
would.
by boat. You have to
Mm.
do it by boat. You can't just fly there. You have to do the whole like boat passage thing.
There's one flight that goes, the closest flight to Antarctica goes from like somewhere in Chile to Sydney. And it sort of,
Hmm.
it doesn't really go over the continent, but it's the quickest way to get, because both are pretty far south. So you, instead of going across the Pacific, which is because the Earth is a globe, allegedly,
Hmm.
um,
Yeah.
it's quicker to go sort of the down the bottom because it's a shorter
Hmm.
route. I don't know that
Oh,
they do that flight anymore.
by
Yeah,
the way,
sorry.
I gotta ask because you mentioned New Zealand. What's the deal with Kiwis, bro?
Give me context. What?
Like, what is like what's their fucking problem? Why are they like that?
I'm the worst. Australians aren't good to us because like Australians and Kiwis have a relationship like Canadians and Americans. Like, so
Mm.
kind of similar culturally, but very different as well, you know, like
Hmm. Hmm.
yeah, they're weird. They're very arrogant too. Like, I don't like,
Yeah.
a lot of them are very sort of like chauvinistic about New Zealand and how great it is. A beautiful country. I've been there, and it is scenically beautiful and everything. But yeah, Kiwis, man, they
It's
in
like relax. Like whenever I
exactly.
watch like Kiwi shows or whatever, I just want to be like, can you fucking stop? Just stop. Stop the whole thing. Like stop doing that thing that you're doing where it's like,
Yeah.
oh, we're all so cute.
Well, it's because they were mostly colonized by what, like the European settlers were mostly sealers. So people who the initial Europeans were people who hunted seals and whales and stuff like that.
Hmm.
And then it was mostly, farmers and, gentry, sort of upper class, whereas Australia's more down to earth because it's all like fucking prisoners, criminals, and so they're all like, they're all a bit sort of, there's a class dynamic to it. Like Australians are better than Kiwis for that reason.
I 100% co-sign that. Having
And
been
we
to neither country and just knowing your entertainment and uh actually I know one of my other I had a friend who was Australian, but he sucks. So you're kind of like balancing that out.
What's
It's
his
like
name? Or
the
sorry, should I save that for the
uh
Patreon?
we'll save it for the Patreon.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
We'll get David to like, yeah, give his takes on
Talk
various
about Australians that I
Australian writers that he
hate.
that is actually a perfect theme.
It is.
Yeah, so did you have anything else to say about Sword?
No, I thought it was just like you said, a very cozy story. Not necessarily the philosophical bomb of the other three, but just a really fun, good girl power story. I
Mm-hmm.
liked it a lot.
Yeah. I think we've covered like a range of different like tones and shades that Ursula has, but there's obviously much more. The novels are great. Pretty much all of them that I've read, I've loved.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
And
mm-hmm.
they're often called categorized as soft science fiction, which I think is there's a lot of feminist critiques of that term, which I kind of actually agree with because it's fairly pejorative, or at least it has that association because
Yeah, right.
Ursula is interested in culture and like anthropology and like the way that societies work and navigating all of that sort of stuff rather than the high tech hard science fiction of someone like Arthur C. Clarke or whatever, which is always
Just so
based.
boring.
It's so boring.
Stupid.
I don't care. I don't care about like I care about humans. So I'm
Mhm.
way more interested in stories about how humans react to the future rather than, oh, there's this new technology. What are the implications? I'm
Yeah.
like, leave that
Yeah.
to like,
We're not autistic
yeah.
people, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't know, maybe I'm being dismissive, but whatever. But that's what I love about Ursula. Like this, there's a humanity to it, even if she's talking about fucking troglodyte aliens.
Hmm.
You know,
Hmm.
it's about the human in the future rather than talking about technology or, well, although her contributions to science fiction technology stuff are pretty substantial. She came up with the idea of the Ansible. Have you ever heard of this?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah,
Of
so
course.
that's the
Yeah.
idea of like faster than light
Hmm.
communication, which other people have sort of used, and but that she coined the term for it. But yeah, I would recommend all of these stories. I chose these stories from, they're all collected in The Unreal and the Real, but this is in volume 2. So these are the more kind of I guess otherworldly stories, whereas volume 1 is more her realistic stuff. And that's the thing as well. She did do kind of more literary, quote unquote, realistic fiction as well. So yeah. And also I
That
haven't read,
also
yeah.
that might be an Australian thing because my Unreal and the Real is all one huge volume.
Oh, really? Okay.
Hmm.
Mm. Okay. It might be. Yeah. It's weird. We live in a globalist world. Why can't we just all have the same book?
Just the same books.
Yeah. Why is it always different? And why can I get some things, like if I want to get an audiobook, I can get some things here, but not like I can get them on audiobook if I like try and hack into the American system,
Mhm.
but I can't get it in Australia. It's annoying. Anyway, I won't
Nice.
rant about
Yeah.
that. But thank you, David, for joining me. We'll have to talk about another Ursula K Le Guin, maybe a full novel, and we will
Ooh, let's do it. Yeah.
we will definitely do with Kelby some more Gene Wolfe at some point if you guys are up for it.
Let's go. Let's go.
Yeah,
We
what's the
look
next
forward
one?
to being Go ahead.
What you look forward to being what?
The most guest
The
on
most
Getting Lit.
guests.
Yeah.
Yeah, you probably are because we did that series. So yeah.
Mhm, mhm.
But yeah, I was just gonna ask, what's the next one we should do you think for Uncle Gene?
Oh, the fifth head of Cerberus for sure.
Oh yeah, I love that book. So yeah.
Yeah.
But in terms of Long
Yeah.
Sun, which is it Long Sun that's the next
Oh,
one?
Earth of the New Sun would be the next one.
All right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll do that.
Which I have
eventually.
actually read. I'm looking at it right now. I got it right over there.
Mm.
So whenever you're ready.
But yeah, where can people find you? What books should they buy? Give us your spiel.
People can find me on TikTok and Instagram at BRBJDO. I would encourage everybody to buy books from Broken River authors. If you go to brokenriverbooks.com, you can see who those authors are. We're a collective.
Several of them have been on the show. Yeah.
Yes, Kelby, Eddie, David Simmons, Grant Womack. They're all on there. And for my books, yeah, the two most recent ones are Dying World and A War in Heaven, which are Book of the New Sun inspired cyberpunk adventures, I guess. They're funny, they're gross, they're violent. It's all sex and violence, basically.
Hell yeah.
But I'm having a good time doing it.
That's why we love them. And yeah, I'll have links to that in the show notes. And yeah, thanks, David. And we will continue this in Patreon where David's going to shade some people, apparently. So I'm looking forward to that.
Everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks.